The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. It was an era marked by cooperation, trade, and the absence of large-scale conflicts. For centuries, various species had come together under the Treaty of Galactic, a universal agreement to keep peace and avoid war. The treaty was held in such high regard that most believed its promises would last forever. But everything changed one fateful day. The Zorathians, an aggressive and ancient species known for their dominance and ruthless tactics, made a shocking decision. They tore up the Treaty of Galactic and declared war on humanity. A sudden broadcast was sent to every corner of the galaxy, announcing that the Zorathians had broken the peace, specifically targeting Earth. The message was direct and filled with warning. The Zorathian Supreme Leader's voice echoed across all comms. The time has come. Humanity has grown too powerful. We will reclaim what is ours. The war begins now. The shockwave that followed rocked the galaxy. For millennia, the Zorathians had lived in peace with humanity, a race they considered insignificant and primitive. Yet here they were calling for war, but no one expected the reaction from Earth. As the broadcast ended, there was a moment of stunned silence across the planet. Then, to the shock of the galaxy, Earth's leaders reacted with laughter. The response was baffling. On every screen, in every conference room, human leaders laughed. It wasn't a mockery or a taunt, it was genuine laughter, full of disbelief. The alien ambassador to the United Nations, a representative from the Galactic Council, frowned, unable to comprehend why humanity wasn't terrified. Are you saying we should fear them? President Carlyle of Earth's United Governments chuckled, his voice carrying across the room. The Zorathians? The same species who've never stepped foot on Earth? You expect us to tremble? Around him, human officials shook their heads in disbelief. The ambassadors from other planets who had gathered in the same room exchanged uncertain glances. Was this some sort of human trick? Or were they simply naive? I think they've finally lost it, muttered one ambassador, as an image of the Zorathian fleet, massive and intimidating, appeared on the screens. The Zorathians had underestimated humanity for centuries. They assumed that Earth was still in its primitive age, stuck in old battles with primitive weapons. They believed humanity was too weak to be a real threat, too distracted by their own problems to ever pose a serious risk. The idea that the Zorathians would challenge Earth now seemed absurd to them. But as the laughter echoed through Earth's government halls, the Zorathians weren't laughing. They didn't know what to make of it. The idea that humans were unfazed by their declaration of war threw them off balance. Across the galaxy, many species watched in confusion. The treaty had kept peace for thousands of years, and the idea of it breaking was already unsettling. But the fact that humans weren't afraid was more unsettling still. The Zorathian fleets, thousands of warships ready to strike, were already heading toward Earth. But instead of a planet cowering in fear, humanity was planning. On the streets of major cities, human civilians continued their daily lives, not even acknowledging the looming threat. In military bunkers, human commanders were already working on their response, calm and methodical. A plan was being developed, but it wasn't out of fear, it was simply out of necessity. Humans had faced wars before. They had faced threats far greater than the Zorathians. The Zorathian military commanders were infuriated. They couldn't understand why the humans didn't fear them. The galaxy had always looked to the Zorathians as the undisputed masters of war. But now, they were being laughed at by an inferior species. We will teach them the true meaning of fear, the supreme leader of the Zorathians growled as he watched Earth's response unfold on his monitor. By the time we're finished, humanity will know its place in the galaxy. The Zorathian forces were already preparing for the invasion, their ships closing in on Earth's atmosphere. The humans, however, were far from intimidated. Their technology, while not as advanced in certain areas, was uniquely versatile. Earth's military had mastered guerrilla tactics, resourceful strategies, and the power of adaptability, something the Zorathians could never predict. Earth wasn't afraid. They were preparing for something much worse than war, but the galaxy wasn't sure what to make of it. Could the humans truly withstand such a fierce enemy? Or had they underestimated the Zorathians themselves? Only time would tell. The Zorathians had broken the 3,000-year peace, but humanity's response was clear. They didn't fear the galaxy's most feared species. They laughed in its face. And as the first wave of Zorathian ships entered Earth's orbit, it became clear that humanity was not only prepared, they were about to change the very fabric of the galaxy. The Zorathian fleets were now visible in Earth's atmosphere, their enormous warships hanging like dark clouds in the sky. The Zorathians had sent their best ships, loaded with the most advanced weapons in their arsenal. These warships were built for one purpose: to destroy. From the outside, it looked like a one-sided battle was inevitable. The Zorathians had the power to wipe out Earth's defenses with ease, and most galactic species thought it was only a matter of time before the humans surrendered. But what they didn't know was that humans weren't afraid of the Zorathians. They didn't even feel the pressure of the war. The more the Zorathians threatened, the more Earth's leaders smiled. While the Zorathian Supreme Leader stood in his command center, glaring at the holographic map of Earth, he could not understand the human response. They had been laughed at. They had been dismissed. And yet the human species continued to stand firm. The Supreme Leader banged his fist on the control panel in frustration. "Why aren't they running? Why aren't they cowering like every other species we've conquered?" he growled. "Do they not know what we can do?" His officers stood around him silent. They were equally puzzled by the strange human reaction. The Zorathians had expected Earth to fall into panic, its people hiding in fear while their governments begged for mercy. Instead, humans remained calm and collected. They were preparing for war, but not out of desperation, just out of necessity. Humanity was used to hardship, to fighting against the odds. The human military response was swift. Earth's defenses were not as sophisticated as the Zorathians' weapons, but they were built for resilience. The Zorathians had underestimated the humans' ability to adapt and use unconventional methods. Human commanders sat in their strategy rooms analyzing every movement of the Zorathian fleet. They knew the Zorathians would attack in waves, expecting to overwhelm the Earth's forces. But humanity had a different plan, one that would make their enemies regret ever underestimating them. The Zorathians think they can just land and destroy everything in their path. They have no idea what we're capable of, General Hayes said, his voice steady as he watched the battle unfold on his screen. Earth's military had never faced a foe like the Zorathians, but they knew one thing for sure. They couldn't allow themselves to be caught off guard. They were going to make the Zorathians fight for every inch of ground. They weren't going to surrender. They weren't going to show fear. All across Earth, people were getting ready. From the major cities to the rural towns, every human, soldier, and civilian alike knew that the fight for survival had begun. They all understood that this wasn't just about protecting their planet. This was about proving something to the galaxy. This was about showing that humanity would never be a race to be ignored. In the skies above, the Zorathian warships continued their slow descent toward Earth. They began to deploy their landing forces, expecting to crush any human resistance with sheer firepower. But when the Zorathians' forces landed, they were met with a surprise. The Zorathians had expected Earth to be weak, its military disorganized and slow to respond. But instead, Earth had been preparing for this day for years. While other species spent their time in peace talks and galactic alliances, humanity had been honing its skills in combat and tactics, preparing for the unexpected. The war was not an event the humans had sought, but it was one they were ready for. "Prepare for the counterattack," General Hayes ordered. "We'll make them regret ever coming here." The first wave of Zorathian soldiers began to descend to the ground, armed with high-tech weapons designed to cut through anything in their path. But Earth's resistance was swift and organized. Instead of facing an unarmed populace, the Zorathians encountered a well-prepared force, using guerrilla tactics and traps to slow their advance. The Zorathian soldiers were confused. They had expected easy victory, but the humans were relentless. They were fighting with every ounce of strength they had. They weren't just defending, they were fighting for their survival. Earth's military used the Zorathians' own arrogance against them. Instead of engaging them directly, Humanity set up traps that exploited the Zorathians' overconfidence. Earth cities were built with hidden passageways, old infrastructure, and underground tunnels that the invaders didn't expect. These hidden paths allowed humanity to ambush the Zorathians from unexpected angles, throwing them into disarray. Meanwhile, Earth's leaders continued to rally their people. The global broadcast was filled with messages of hope, urging every human to stand together. From the youngest children to the elderly, everyone was helping in some way, whether by providing supplies, offering shelter, or joining the resistance. The Zorathians' plan was falling apart. As the battle continued, the Zorathians grew more desperate. They sent in heavier forces, their warships firing relentlessly at the human positions. But the humans weren't backing down. They had adapted to the situation faster than anyone could have predicted. Earth's cities had been turned into fortified strongholds, and the Zorathians were finding it increasingly difficult to break through. The fight was no longer just about territory. It had become a symbol, a fight to prove that humanity would not bend to the will of any conqueror, no matter how powerful. Back on the Zorathian flagship, the supreme leader clenched his fists in frustration. His forces were being pushed back. The humans were not following the script. They were not falling apart as expected. Instead, they were fighting smarter, harder, and with more determination than any of the galaxy's other species. "They must have something we don't know about," one of his generals said, pacing nervously. "Their tactics are unlike anything we've seen. Do not underestimate them any longer," the supreme leader warned, his voice filled with anger. "We will not leave until they are destroyed." But as the Zorathians continued to fight, they slowly began to realize that this war wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. The humans had one thing the Zorathians could never understand: the will to fight, the courage to stand tall against impossible odds. The Zorathians might have had power, but the humans had something far more dangerous: human ingenuity. And that, the Zorathians were about to learn, would be their greatest mistake. The battle for Earth had entered its second week, and the tide was beginning to turn. What the Zorathians had expected to be a quick and easy conquest had become a nightmare. Their warships, once poised to strike with deadly precision, were now being held at bay by humanity's unexpected strength and resourcefulness. The Zorathians had never faced anything like it before. They had swept through planets in the past, their fleets of warships and ruthless soldiers overwhelming entire civilizations. But Earth was different. It was not just the advanced weapons or the well-organized military. It was something more. It was the human spirit. In the skies above, the Zorathian fleet began to shake under the pressure of Earth's growing defenses. Human ships, once thought outdated and insignificant, had been equipped with new technology and innovative designs that made them difficult targets. The Zorathian warships, massive and intimidating, now found themselves in a battle they couldn't win so easily. "Why won't they just give up?" the Zorathian commander muttered in disbelief. His fleet had launched wave after wave of attacks, but humanity seemed to have an endless supply of tricks. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans pulled something new out of their sleeves. Every battle ended in more destruction for the Zorathians. On the ground, the situation was no better. The Zorathian soldiers had initially been confident, expecting to sweep through Earth cities and crush any resistance. But as they advanced, they were met with unexpected challenges. The humans had turned their cities into fortresses, using everything from old buildings to modern technology to create defenses that were nearly impossible to break. Zorathian tanks, designed to tear through enemy lines, were ambushed and destroyed by guerrilla forces that had been trained for situations like this. Humans used the environment to their advantage, hiding in underground bunkers and using hidden pathways to strike from unexpected angles. The Zorathians' military, once so proud and unstoppable, was beginning to crack. "Retreat!" One Zorathian officer screamed as his squad was ambushed by human fighters. It was a moment of panic, a moment that would have been unthinkable only days ago. Back at their command center, the Zorathians were growing desperate. The supreme leader watched in stunned silence as his forces were pushed back further and further. His once confident demeanor had been replaced by frustration. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Why haven't we crushed them yet?" His officers were just as confused. "We've thrown everything at them, our strongest soldiers, our best weapons. And yet, they keep coming back. They fight harder every time." The Supreme Leader paced angrily. "We will not stop until they are annihilated. They must bend to our will." But deep down, even he knew that something had changed. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something more. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy. They had been underestimated for too long, and now, the Zorathians were paying the price. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human military was rallying. General Hayes, standing in front of a holographic map of the battlefields, could hardly contain his satisfaction. "We've got them on the ropes," he said, his voice calm yet filled with confidence. "They've underestimated us from the start, and now they're paying for it." His officers nodded. They had been preparing for this moment, working day and night to come up with new strategies to outsmart the invaders. What had started as a desperate defense had turned into an offensive, with humanity slowly but surely driving the Zorathians back. But it wasn't just the military that was involved. Across Earth, civilians were stepping up in ways that no one had expected. People from every walk of life had joined the effort, from farmers to scientists, from teachers to engineers. Every human, whether they were a soldier or a civilian, had found a way to contribute. The Zorathians had thought they could conquer Earth with their superior firepower, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. Humans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with their hearts and minds. The Zorathians had expected a war of brute strength, but what they found was a war of ingenuity. Humanity's ability to adapt, to learn quickly, and to work together had become their greatest weapon. The Zorathians had underestimated how quickly humanity could turn the tables. It wasn't just about fighting back, it was about outsmarting their enemies at every turn. As the Zorathian fleet pulled back to regroup, they realized they were not facing an enemy that could be crushed with sheer force. They were facing an enemy that could adapt, survive, and ultimately defeat them with the very qualities the Zorathians had long dismissed as weaknesses: creativity, unity, and resilience. "This is impossible," one Zorathian officer muttered, watching as Earth ships launched a counterattack, their weapons striking with deadly precision. "It's not impossible," the Supreme Leader replied, his voice bitter. "It's just human." The Zorathians' initial confidence had been shattered, and now they found themselves in a losing battle, unsure of how to proceed. They had underestimated the humans, and that was a mistake they would never be able to undo. Back on Earth, the people knew that this was just the beginning. They had won some battles, but the war was far from over. They knew the Zorathians would keep coming, but they also knew one thing: they were ready. Humanity had already proven that they were not to be underestimated. They had shown the galaxy that Earth was not a weak, defenseless planet, but a force to be reckoned with. And the Zorathians would soon learn that no matter how powerful their fleets, no matter how advanced their weapons, they would never be able to conquer the human spirit. The war had been raging for weeks, and humanity was no longer on the defensive. The Zorathians, who had once expected to dominate Earth, now found themselves constantly pushed back, their grand plans unraveling bit by bit. The tide of the war had begun to turn in humanity's favor. The Zorathians had sent wave after wave of attack, but each one had failed to break Earth's resistance. Human soldiers, no longer just defending their homes, had become hunters. They had learned the art of combat, but more importantly, they had learned how to outsmart their enemies. With each passing day, the humans gained ground, slowly but surely. In the skies, Earth's military was no longer just holding the line. They were striking back. Humanity's ships, once thought outdated and ineffective compared to the mighty Zorathian fleet, had become a serious threat. Their strategies were unpredictable, and their weapons, though not as advanced, were deadly in the hands of soldiers who had learned to fight for survival. The Zorathian High Command was in a state of chaos. Their forces, once confident and powerful, were now scattered and confused. The Supreme Leader paced around his command center, unable to hide his growing frustration. "Why aren't we winning?" he demanded, his voice filled with anger. "How is this possible? His officers, once full of pride, were now silent. They had no answers. The humans had fought in ways they hadn't anticipated. They had fought with creativity, with surprise, and with a determination that was hard to break. "They're using their environment against us," one officer finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "They're ambushing us from places we didn't even know existed, and they're always one step ahead of us." The Supreme Leader clenched his fists in frustration. "This shouldn't be happening. We are the superior species. We have the best technology. We should have crushed them by now." But the Zorathians had underestimated one crucial thing: the human will to fight. The more the Zorathians pushed, the harder humanity pushed back. The Zorathians had counted on humanity's fear, their weakness. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. On Earth, General Hayes and his officers gathered in a secure command room, studying the latest reports from the front lines. They had been prepared for a long fight, but no one had expected this much success so quickly. "We've taken back another city," General Hayes said, his tone calm but filled with pride. "The Zorathians are retreating from the east. We've broken their supply lines, and they're running low on resources." One of the officers, Lieutenant Wells, looked up from the map. "The longer we keep pushing them back, the less they'll have to fight with. We can win this. We just need to keep the pressure on." General Hayes nodded. "Exactly. We've taken a few cities, and now we need to make sure they can't regroup. We're going to hit them harder." Across Earth, the fight continued. The Zorathians, once so sure of their victory, were now fighting for survival. Earth's forces had taken control of more cities and more territory, slowly forcing the Zorathians into a retreat. It was no longer just about defending their homes. It was about reclaiming the Earth from an invader who had underestimated humanity. The Zorathian Supreme Leader's frustration turned to fear. His once proud army was being driven back, and Earth's forces were gaining strength every day. He realized that the humans were not just resilient, they were capable of doing the impossible. He turned to his top generals, his voice filled with desperation. "We must stop them. We cannot let them take any more of our territory. If we lose this war, we lose everything." But his generals had no answers. The humans were proving to be more than just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. They had learned from their mistakes, adapted to the war, and were now using their own weaknesses as strengths. The Zorathians could no longer predict their moves. They could no longer crush humanity as they had done with other civilizations. The Supreme Leader knew he had to act fast, but even he began to understand that this was no longer just about military might. This was about survival, Earth's survival and his own. The Zorathians began to shift their tactics, but it was too late. Their ships were spread thin, and their soldiers, once confident and ready for battle, were now demoralized. They had underestimated their enemies, and now they were paying the price. On Earth, the people sensed the turning tide. Across the globe, people watched as their military forces pushed back the Zorathians, gaining ground every day. The once feared invaders were now on the retreat, their impressive fleets no match for Earth's unpredictable tactics. As the humans continued their relentless assault, General Hayes addressed the world in a global broadcast. "Every step we take, every victory we achieve is not just for Earth. It's for every species that believes in freedom." The Zorathians thought they could conquer us, but they underestimated what it means to be human. "We fight for each other, and we will win this war." The response from Earth's people was overwhelming. The streets filled with support, with civilians and soldiers alike celebrating each victory. Humanity had come together like never before. This was no longer just a war. It was a fight for their future, a fight to prove that they were not just survivors, but warriors. As the war continued, the Zorathian retreat became more evident. They were no longer fighting to conquer. They were fighting to escape. Humanity's resistance had grown stronger, and the Zorathians realized that they could not win this war. But there was still one more battle to fight. As the humans pushed forward, one thing was certain: the Zorathians would never be the same, and humanity, against all odds, had shown the galaxy that they would never back down. The war between humanity and the Zorathians had reached its breaking point. What had begun as an invasion by the galaxy's most powerful species had turned into an embarrassing retreat. The Zorathians, who had underestimated Earth's power, were now running from the humans they had once thought of as weak. General Hayes watched the final wave of Zorathian ships pull back from Earth's atmosphere. The sight filled him with a sense of triumph, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. Earth had won the fight, but the Zorathians were not yet finished. They would return, and humanity had to be ready for that moment. "It's almost over," Lieutenant Wells said, standing beside the general as they watched the Zorathian fleet disappear into the distance. "We've pushed them back, but we can't let our guard down." General Hayes nodded. "We've shown them that we will never surrender. But this isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about the entire galaxy knowing that humans can fight back, that we can win when we stand together." Back at Zorathian command, the Supreme Leader stood in disbelief. His fleet, once the most feared in the galaxy, was now in full retreat. His soldiers had been crushed by an enemy they had dismissed as unworthy of attention. His empire, built on conquest and terror, was unraveling in the face of a determined, resilient human race. "This cannot be happening," he growled, his voice filled with anger. "We should have wiped them out in days, not weeks. They should have bowed to us." One of his generals, still shaken by the defeats, spoke quietly. "It's over. We have no more strength to fight. The humans are everywhere, and they know how to use the land, the cities, the very world against us." The Supreme Leader slammed his fist down on the console. "Then we must make them regret it." But deep down, even he knew it was too late. The Zorathian invasion was a failure. Earth's people had fought with a fierceness and unity the Zorathians had never anticipated. Humanity's victory was not just on the battlefield, it was a statement to the galaxy. The humans had shown, the galaxy, that no matter how powerful the invader, no matter how strong the enemy, humans would never back down. On Earth, the celebrations began. The cities were alive with joy as humans from every corner of the planet came together to honor their victory. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, and civilians all had played a part in the war effort. They had shown the galaxy that they were not just survivors. They were conquerors in their own right. General Hayes addressed the world one last time, his voice calm but full of pride. "We've won, but this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new era. The Zorathians came here expecting an easy victory. They found something else. They found a humanity that would never be defeated. And now, the galaxy will know that Earth is not to be underestimated. We will never bow down. We will always fight." The message was heard across the galaxy. From the peaceful worlds to the war-torn corners of the galaxy, humanity's victory was felt everywhere. The Zorathians, who had once believed they were the ultimate conquerors, were now seen as a defeated species. And Earth, the little planet that had once been written off as insignificant, was now a symbol of defiance and strength. But the Supreme Leader of the Zorathians was not finished. He had lost the battle, but he refused to accept defeat. His empire had crumbled, but he was determined to rise again. "We will rebuild," he said, his eyes burning with anger. "We will return stronger than ever. The humans may have won this battle, but the war is not over. We will have our revenge." However, the galaxy was beginning to take notice of the shift in power. The Zorathians were no longer the unquestioned rulers of the galaxy. Earth's victory had inspired other species to take a stand, to believe that even the most powerful empires could fall. The humans had not just survived, they had changed the course of galactic history. They had proven that when pushed to the edge, they would fight back with everything they had. And the galaxy would never forget that lesson. In the aftermath of the war, Earth's leaders met with the representatives of the Galactic Council, which had long been indifferent to humanity's rise. They had watched as the Zorathians made their move, believing humanity would crumble under the pressure. But now, the Council saw things differently. "We underestimated you," one of the council members admitted, his tone respectful. "The Zorathians were right to fear you. We should have recognized your potential long ago." General Hayes nodded. "It's not just about fear, it's about respect. Earth has earned its place among the stars. We won't be looked down upon anymore. The Council, once hesitant to acknowledge Earth's strength, now had no choice but to recognize humanity as a force to be reckoned with. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and Earth was now firmly in control of its own destiny. As the years passed, the story of Earth's resistance and triumph became a legend across the galaxy. The Zorathians, broken and humiliated, retreated to their distant world, their once great empire now a shadow of its former self. But for humanity, the war was over. They had not just survived, they had thrived. And as Earth's people looked up at the stars, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them. Because humanity had shown the galaxy something no one would ever forget. No one, no matter how powerful, could ever truly conquer Earth.